When the horse gave birth, the owner was left in shock, not because of the foal's arrival, but because of the life-changing twist it brought with it. The tiny, fragile colt was never part of the plan, and his unexpected birth seemed like a setback. But as the colt grew, he proved to be more than just an accident. He became a symbol of resilience, heart, and second chances. How did this unlikely champion defy every expectation? And how did he transform not only his owner's life, but the future of an entire farm? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The autumn air crackled with excitement at the Cedar Grove horse auction. Liam Brown stood with his hands in his pockets, his weathered face set in concentration as he studied each horse being paraded before the crowd. 20 years of training champions had taught him what to look for, and today he needed something special. His reputation had taken some hits lately. 3 competitions, 3 disappointments. The whispers were getting louder. Maybe Liam's lost his touch, they said. He clenched his jaw, pushing the thoughts aside. Then he saw her, a dappled gray mare with legs that seemed to float above the ground. Misty, according to the program. Her neck was proudly arched, her movements fluid and graceful. But it was her eyes that caught his attention, bright and alert, scanning the crowd with intelligence. Lot number 47, the auctioneer announced. Misty's Mountain Dawn, 5 years old, impeccable bloodlines from the Sterling Valley stables. Liam's heart quickened. Sterling Valley was known for producing champions. He raised his bidding card, and the battle began. A man in a black cowboy hat kept matching his bids, driving the price higher. Liam's palm grew sweaty around the bidding card, but he wouldn't back down. Not this time. Sold! The auctioneer's gavel came down with a sharp crack. Liam allowed himself a small smile. Misty was his. The drive home should have been triumphant, but Misty's constant shifting in the trailer kept drawing his attention to the rearview mirror. She stomped and snorted, making the whole trailer rock. Just auction day jitters, Liam muttered to himself, turning up the radio to drown out the sounds. When they arrived at Brown's training stables, the sun was setting, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. Ellie Carter, his apprentice, came jogging out to meet them, her brown ponytail bouncing with each step. "How did it go?" she asked, eyes bright with curiosity. "See for yourself," Liam said, unable to keep the pride from his voice as he opened the trailer. Misty backed out carefully, her coat gleaming in the evening light. But Ellie's excited expression quickly shifted to concern as she watched the mare. Misty's ears were pinned back, her tail swishing nervously. She kept shifting her weight from hoof to hoof, refusing to stand still. "Mr. Brown," Ellie said carefully, "something doesn't seem right. Maybe we should have Dr. Martinez take a look at her." Liam shook his head as he led Misty to her new stall. "She's fine. Just needs to settle in, that's all. Some horses take time to adjust to new surroundings." Ellie bit her lip, unconvinced. She watched as Misty paced in her stall, barely touching the fresh hay Liam had put out. The mare's nostrils flared with each breath, her eyes wide and unsettled. "If you say so, Mr. Brown," Ellie said quietly. But as she headed to finish her evening chores, she made a mental note to check on Misty throughout the night. Something in her gut told her the mare's behavior wasn't just new home jitters, and she'd learned to trust those instincts. The morning sun had barely peeked over the horizon when Liam walked down to the stables, coffee mug in hand. He was surprised to find Ellie already there, her face creased with worry as she leaned against Misty's stall door. "Mr. Brown," she called out, her voice tight with concern. "Misty hasn't touched her breakfast, and according to my notes, she was up most of the night. I checked on her every couple of hours." Liam frowned, taking in the untouched feed and the way Misty continued to pace in her stall. The mare's coat was damp with sweat despite the cool morning air. "Fine," he sighed, pulling out his phone. "I'll call Dr. Martinez." The vet arrived within the hour, her truck kicking up dust as she pulled into the driveway. Dr. Martinez was a petite woman with graying hair and gentle hands that seemed to instantly calm nervous animals. She approached Misty slowly, speaking in soft tones as she began her examination. After several minutes of careful observation and checking vital signs, Dr. Martinez stepped back with a knowing smile. "Well, I can tell you what's going on with your new mare, Liam. She's pregnant, and pretty far along, I'd say." "What?" Liam's coffee mug clattered against the stall door. "That's impossible. The auction house didn't say anything about." "Based on what I'm seeing, she's probably about 9 months along," Dr. Martinez continued. "This definitely happened before she went to auction." Liam's face turned red with anger. "They sold me a pregnant mare without disclosure? This completely derails my training schedule. I needed her ready for spring competitions." While Liam fumed, Ellie's eyes lit up with excitement. "A baby?" she whispered, reaching out to stroke Misty's neck. "No wonder you've been so uncomfortable, sweet girl." "This is a disaster," Liam growled, running his hands through his hair. "I'll need to contact the auction house, demand an explanation. This isn't what I paid for." He turned and stormed toward the house, muttering under his breath about lawyers and contracts. Ellie stayed behind, her hand still gentle on Misty's neck. "Don't worry about him," she whispered to the mare. "He'll come around. And you're going to be an amazing mama." She reached into her pocket and pulled out an apple she'd been saving for later. "Here you go, beautiful. You're eating for 2 now." Misty's soft muzzle tickled Ellie's palm as she took the treat, and for the first time since arriving, the mare's eyes seemed to soften. She pressed her head against Ellie's chest, letting out a quiet, nickering sound that made Ellie's heart melt. The next morning dawned crisp and clear as Ellie made her way to the stables, arms full of fresh hay. She found Misty standing quietly in her stall, a marked difference from her restless behavior the day before. "Good morning, sweet mama," Ellie cooed, spreading the hay. Misty nickered softly, her dark eyes peaceful as she began to eat. Later, over breakfast in the farmhouse kitchen, Ellie watched Liam frown at his paperwork. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Mr. Brown, I've been thinking about Misty's pregnancy," she began. "Maybe this could be something special. We could raise the foal from day one, train it ourselves." "Ellie," Liam cut her off, not looking up from his papers. "This isn't some fairy tale. That mare was supposed to be my comeback in the spring circuit. Now I'm stuck waiting around for a foal we didn't plan for." Before Ellie could respond, Dr. Martinez's truck pulled into the driveway. The vet carried her medical bag in a thick folder as she entered the barn. "Well, let's see how our mama-to-be is doing," she said, beginning her examination. After several minutes, she turned to them with a smile. "Everything looks good. Now we need to discuss preparing for the birth." Dr. Martinez handed Liam a detailed list. "You'll need to set up a proper foaling stall, plenty of clean straw, good ventilation, and enough space for both mare and foal. I'd recommend setting up cameras, too, for monitoring." Liam's jaw tightened as he scanned the list. "Fine. I'll start on the stall today." "I can help with that," Ellie offered quickly. "And I've already started researching foal care. Did you know they need to nurse within 2 hours of birth? And their first steps?" "Just focus on the stall for now," Liam interrupted. But Ellie noticed his tone wasn't quite as harsh as before. They spent the afternoon working side by side, though barely speaking. Ellie's enthusiasm bubbled over as she arranged fresh straw and helped install the monitoring equipment, while Liam worked with mechanical efficiency, his face unreadable. As evening approached, Ellie dragged an old cot into the stable office, along with a sleeping bag and flashlight. She was setting up her makeshift bed when she felt eyes on her. Looking up, she caught Liam watching from the doorway. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. His expression flickered between concern and something softer before he turned and walked away into the gathering darkness, leaving Ellie to her vigil. The urgent pounding on his bedroom door jolted Liam from sleep. Ellie's voice cut through the darkness, high with excitement and worry. "Mr. Brown, it's happening. Misty's having the foal." Liam stumbled out of bed, grabbing his jacket. His fingers fumbled with the buttons as he hurried down the stairs, following Ellie's bouncing flashlight beam toward the stable. Inside, Misty was lying on her side in the foaling stall, her sides heaving. Dr. Martinez was already there, having arrived minutes earlier after Ellie's call. "Good timing," the vet said, her face serious. "This might be a long night." Hours crawled by. Misty's labor progressed slowly, each contraction seeming to drain more of her strength. Ellie stayed by the mare's head, stroking her neck and murmuring encouragement. Liam paced nearby, running his hands through his disheveled hair. "She's getting tired," Dr. Martinez said, checking Misty's vitals again. "But she's strong. She can do this." Near dawn, Misty gave one final mighty push. The tiny foal slipped into the world, wet and trembling. Dr. Martinez worked quickly to clear its airways while Ellie watched, her hands clasped together. "It's a colt," the vet announced, helping the wobbly newborn find his feet. Ellie gasped softly. The foal was smaller than average, with delicate legs that seemed too thin for his body. But what caught everyone's attention were his unusual markings, a reddish-gold coat with darker points that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. "Ember," Ellie breathed, watching as the little colt struggled to stand. Despite his size, he kept trying, his determination obvious in every attempt. "His name is Ember." The colt finally managed to stay upright, though his legs trembled with the effort. He took one shaky step toward his mother, then another. Misty lifted her head, nickering softly to encourage him. Ellie crawled closer, careful not to startle either mare or foal. She reached out slowly, letting Ember catch her scent. The tiny colt pressed his velvet muzzle against her palm, and Ellie's face lit up with pure joy. The first rays of sunlight streamed through the stable windows, casting a golden glow over the scene. Liam stood in the shadows, watching Ellie cradle Ember's head, while Misty rested nearby. For a moment, something warm stirred in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. But then reality crashed back. This fragile colt wasn't part of his plans. He was a complication, a setback to everything Liam had worked for. He pushed the hopeful feeling aside, his expression hardening as he turned away from the touching scene before him. The morning sun filtered through the stable windows as Liam made his way down the center aisle. He heard Ellie's encouraging voice before he saw her, sitting cross-legged in Misty's stall. "That's it, little one. You can do it." Ember stood on trembling legs, his small body swaying like a newborn fawn. His reddish-gold coat caught the morning light as he took a wobbly step forward, then another. His front legs buckled, sending him sprawling onto the fresh straw. "Oh, careful!" Ellie reached out instinctively, but Misty was quicker. The mare gently nudged her foal with her nose, helping him regain his balance. Ember snorted, shaking his head as if annoyed by his own clumsiness. Liam leaned against the stable door, watching as Ember struggled to his feet again. The colt's legs were like matchsticks, far too thin for any serious training. But there was something in the way he kept trying, refusing to stay down. "Mr. Brown." Ellie jumped up, clutching a notebook to her chest. "I've been doing research all morning. Look at this schedule I made." She flipped open the pages, revealing carefully drawn charts and notes. "We need to monitor his feeding every 2 hours, and I found some exercises that could help strengthen his legs." Liam glanced at the notebook, then at the wobbling foal. "Ellie, you're getting ahead of yourself. Look at him. He's half the size he should be. Those legs." He shook his head. "Nature isn't always kind. Sometimes it's better to prepare for the worst." "But he's trying so hard," Ellie protested, her voice rising with emotion. "Just because he's small doesn't mean he can't be strong. He deserves a chance." As if to prove her point, Ember took several determined steps toward them. Though his legs trembled, he stayed upright this time. Misty watched attentively, nickering softly when he reached her side. "He's going to need constant care," Liam said gruffly. "Time we should be spending training Misty." "I'll do it," Ellie said firmly. "I'll take care of everything. Just, please don't give up on him before he's had a chance to try." Liam turned away without responding, but his eyes lingered on the determined little colt. Later that evening, as darkness settled over the stable, Ellie sat in the straw beside Ember. The foal's head rested in her lap as she stroked his neck. "You're going to surprise everyone," she whispered. "We'll show them what you can do. You're going to be amazing." From the shadows of the feed room, Liam heard her words. He watched the gentle scene before him, his practical mind wrestling with doubts, even as something tugged at his heart. The early morning mist still clung to the ground as Liam walked toward the paddock, coffee mug in hand. He expected to find Ember in his usual state, wobbly and uncertain. Instead, he nearly spilled his coffee at what he saw. Ember trotted steadily behind Ellie, matching her pace as she walked the perimeter of the paddock. His legs, though still thin, moved with growing confidence. When Ellie stopped, Ember stopped too, watching her attentively with bright eyes. "Good boy." Ellie's voice carried across the morning air as she offered Ember a small treat. "Now come." She took a few steps backward, and Ember followed without hesitation. Liam set his mug on the fence post and moved closer, intrigued despite himself. He watched as Ellie guided Ember through simple commands: stop, follow, back up. The little colt responded eagerly, his ears pricked forward in concentration. "Let's see how smart he really is," Liam said, breaking his silence. He began dragging hay bales and rolling barrels into the paddock, creating a simple obstacle course. "If he's as talented as you think, this should be easy enough." Ellie led Ember to the start of the course. The first attempt was rough. Ember bumped into a barrel and stumbled over a low hay bale. His small size made even these simple obstacles look daunting. "Just as I thought," Liam scoffed. "He's too small, too weak. You're wasting your time." Ellie's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice gentle as she spoke to Ember. "It's okay, boy. We'll try again." She pulled a treat from her pocket and showed it to him. "Look here. Follow me." This time she walked the course first, letting Ember watch. Then she guided him through it step by step, encouraging him with soft words and gentle touches. Ember moved more carefully now, lifting his legs higher over the hay bales. He squeezed between the barrels slowly, but didn't knock them over. When they reached the end, Ellie's face glowed with pride. "See? He can do it." Liam crossed his arms, watching as Ember nuzzled Ellie's hand for another treat. "Well," he said grudgingly, "I suppose he's not completely hopeless. But don't get carried away. There's a big difference between walking around barrels and real training." As Liam turned and headed back to the house, Ellie knelt beside Ember, wrapping her arms around his neck. "You were perfect," she whispered, her heart swelling with determination. In that quiet moment, she made a silent promise to help this special little horse become something extraordinary. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows as Liam set down his coffee mug with a decisive thud. "I've made up my mind," he announced. "Once Misty's back in shape, I'm focusing all my attention on her training. Ember will be your responsibility." Ellie looked up from her toast, her eyes widening. But Ember has real potential. If we work together, we could train him to be a racehorse. He's getting stronger every day. A racehorse? Liam let out a harsh laugh. Have you looked at him? He's half the size he should be. You're letting your heart cloud your judgment. And you're letting your past failures cloud yours. The words burst from Ellie before she could stop them. The kitchen fell silent. The only sound, the ticking of the wall clock. Liam's face hardened. I've been training horses since before you were born. I know what makes a champion, and that little runt isn't it. Maybe that's exactly why you can't see what's special about him, Ellie shot back, pushing away from the table. You're so stuck in your old ways that you can't recognize something different. Later that morning, Ellie drove to the local library, determination fueling her steps as she walked through the doors. She spent hours poring over books about horse training, taking careful notes in her worn notebook. In the breeding section, she found information about unusual markings in thoroughbreds, wondering if Ember's distinct patterns might hint at an exceptional bloodline. Meanwhile, back at the stable, Liam led Misty through some light exercises in the training ring. The mare moved well, but her attention kept drifting to the paddock where Ember frolicked by himself. Every few minutes her head would turn, ears pricked toward her foal's direction. Focus, girl, Liam muttered, giving the lead rope a gentle tug. But even as he worked with Misty, he found his own gaze drawn to the small colt running circles in the paddock. As evening settled over the stable, Liam finished his final checks for the night. Passing by Ember's stall, he paused at the sound of Ellie's voice. She sat on a hay bale, one of her library books open on her lap, reading aloud to the attentive colt. The key to successful training lies in understanding your horse's natural instincts and building trust, she read softly while Ember stood close, his head lowered near hers as if listening intently. Liam watched them for a long moment, noting how Ember's ears followed every word Ellie spoke. His chest tightened with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Without making his presence known, he turned and walked away, leaving Ellie to her reading. A week later, the morning air was crisp as Ellie worked with Ember in the training ring. She'd set up a simple pattern of poles for him to walk through, building his coordination. The small colt picked his way carefully between them, his concentration evident in his focused expression. That's it, boy, Ellie encouraged, holding the lead rope loosely. Nice and easy. But as Ember rounded the last pole, the rope caught under his front hoof. He stumbled, trying to catch himself, but his legs tangled and he crashed hard onto the packed dirt. His frightened whinny pierced the air. Ember! Ellie rushed to his side, her heart pounding. She knelt beside him, hands hovering uncertainly over his trembling form. Liam's boots crunched across the ground as he approached. This is exactly what I was worried about, he muttered, shaking his head. He's too fragile for serious training. Ember struggled to his feet, favoring his right front leg. Ellie's eyes filled with tears as she watched him test his weight on it. We need to stop the training until he heals, Liam declared firmly. No arguments. Though it pained her, Ellie nodded. She helped Ember back to his stall, carefully checking his leg for swelling. Over the next few days, she spent hours with him, gently massaging the injured leg and making sure he stayed comfortable. During their quiet time together, Ellie noticed something fascinating. Whenever Misty was in view, Ember would watch her intently, copying her head movements and the way she shifted her weight. Even confined to his stall, he seemed eager to learn. This observation sparked an idea. Ellie began creating simple mental exercises for Ember. She taught him to touch different colored buckets with his nose and to respond to specific hand signals. His quick understanding amazed her. She also introduced playful elements to keep his spirits up. Sometimes she'd hide carrots around his stall, making a game of finding them. Other times, she'd sit with him, reading her training books aloud while he listened, his ears pricked forward attentively. As the sun painted the sky orange one evening, Liam was doing his final barn check when Ember hobbled to his stall door. Despite his slight limp, the colt's eyes were bright as he stretched his neck toward Liam, nickering softly. Liam stood still, looking at the small horse. After a long moment, he slowly raised his hand and gave Ember a gentle pat on his neck. The gesture was brief, but it spoke volumes. It was the first time he'd shown any real warmth toward the foal. A gentle rain misted down from gray clouds as Ellie carefully led Ember from his stall. The young colt took tentative steps, his hooves making soft splashing sounds in the puddles that dotted the path to the paddock. His limp was less pronounced now, but Ellie's heart still squeezed with concern at each careful step. "Easy does it, sweet boy," she murmured, keeping the lead rope slack. "We'll take it nice and slow." Once inside the paddock, Ember's ears perked forward with interest. He hadn't been out here since his fall, and the fresh air seemed to revive his spirits. He stretched his neck, sniffing at the wet grass, then took a few experimental steps away from Ellie. From beneath the shelter of the barn overhang, Liam watched with his arms crossed. His expression was hard to read, but his eyes never left the pair as they moved around the paddock. Ember's steps grew bolder as he explored, though his movements still held a trace of awkwardness. Ellie had set up a simple exercise area with low poles lying flat on the ground and a few bright orange cones spaced widely apart. "Look what I've got for you," Ellie called softly, holding up a carrot. Ember's ears swiveled toward her voice, and he walked over with growing confidence. She led him toward the first pole, encouraging him with gentle words and praise. Liam pushed away from the barn wall and approached the paddock fence. "You're babying him too much," he called out. "He needs to learn to push through it." "He needs to trust himself again first," Ellie replied firmly, not taking her eyes off Ember as he carefully lifted his feet over the pole. "Good boy," she exclaimed, offering him a small piece of carrot. "At this rate, he'll never build proper strength," Liam said, entering the paddock. He took the lead rope from Ellie's hands. "Here, let me show you how to do this efficiently." But when Liam tried to urge Ember forward at a brisker pace, the colt balked, pulling back against the rope. "See," Ellie said, taking back the lead. "He knows what he needs. We'll get there, but we'll do it his way." She stroked Ember's neck soothingly, and he relaxed under her touch. To her surprise, Liam didn't argue. He stood back and watched as Ellie guided Ember through the rest of the simple obstacles, offering quiet praise for each small victory. Later, as evening approached, Ellie took her time grooming Ember in his stall. She worked the brush in gentle circles over his coat, talking to him softly. "You're my little champion, you know that?" she whispered, leaning close to his ear. "We're going to prove everyone wrong, you and me." Ember turned his head and pressed his soft muzzle against her hand, his eyes bright and trusting. The connection between them felt almost tangible in the quiet moment, like an invisible thread binding their hearts together. The morning dew still clung to the grass as Ellie approached the stable, her boots leaving dark imprints in the wet earth. She paused at the paddock gate, struck by an unusual sight that made her breath catch. Ember stood near his mother, matching her movements with surprising precision, his small frame a perfect miniature of Misty's graceful form. As Misty lowered her head to graze, Ember did the same, his neck arching identically. When she stretched her neck, he mimicked the motion perfectly, like a silent dance between mother and foal. Ellie's heart leaped with excitement, her hands clasping together. "He's learning by watching," she whispered to herself, quickly grabbing some training equipment from the barn, her mind racing with possibilities. She set up a simple exercise area where Misty could demonstrate basic movements, carefully arranging poles and markers in the dewy grass. Leading Misty through the course, Ellie watched as Ember followed behind, copying each step and turn with remarkable focus. His eyes remained fixed on his mother, his small hooves placing themselves exactly where hers had been, leaving tiny crescents in the earth beside her larger prints. "Look at this," Ellie called out when she spotted Liam approaching through the morning mist. "He's picking everything up just by watching Misty. It's amazing." Liam leaned against the fence, his expression thoughtful as Ember cleared a low jump right after his mother, landing with unexpected grace. He said, uncrossing his arms and leaning forward with interest. "Maybe there's something there after all. Try the advanced course." Encouraged by Liam's interest, Ellie guided Misty toward a more complex arrangement of obstacles, her heart beating faster with anticipation. Ember followed eagerly, his confidence growing with each successful movement, his small body moving with increasing sureness. But when they reached a narrow hurdle, his smaller stride betrayed him. His back hoof caught the edge, and he stumbled forward, nearly losing his balance before catching himself. "See?" Liam shook his head, his earlier interest fading to familiar skepticism. "Size matters in this business. He'll never make it as a proper jumper. Some things you just can't work around." "He just needs a different approach," Ellie insisted, already mentally adjusting her strategy, her determination only strengthening. She grabbed her notebook and began sketching new training ideas, focusing on exercises that would play to Ember's strengths rather than emphasize his limitations, her pencil moving quickly across the paper. As the day drew to a close, Ellie sat on the paddock fence, still working on her training plans, the wood warm beneath her from the day's sun. The setting sun painted the sky in soft oranges and pinks, casting long shadows across the practice area. She heard the soft thud of hooves approaching, and then Ember was there, gently placing his head in her lap, his warm breath tickling her arm. His eyes met hers with such trust and determination that her heart swelled with affection, reminding her exactly why she believed in him so completely. "We'll figure this out together," she whispered, scratching behind his ears and feeling the silky softness of his coat. "I promise. We're going to prove them all wrong." The annual town fair bustled with activity, colorful banners fluttering in the gentle breeze. Ellie led Misty and Ember through the crowded fairgrounds, her excitement barely contained. She had spent days convincing Liam to bring them both, and now here they were, surrounded by the cheerful chaos of food vendors, game stalls, and horse demonstrations. "Just keep them calm," Liam warned, walking beside them with his usual stern expression. "We're here to show Misty, not cause a scene." Misty's demonstration came first. She moved with natural elegance, her coat gleaming in the sunlight as she performed basic dressage movements. The crowd oohed and ahed, exactly the reaction Liam had hoped for. Ember watched from a nearby pen, his attention fixed on his mother's every move. Suddenly, shouts of alarm cut through the applause. A heavy supply cart had broken loose from its moorings at the top of a slight incline. It gathered speed as it rolled toward a group of children playing near the demonstration area. Parents scrambled to reach their kids, but they were too far away. Before anyone could react, Ember burst from his pen. His small frame moved with surprising speed as he darted past the stunned onlookers. With perfect timing, he positioned himself beside the runaway cart, pressing his body against it. His hooves dug into the dirt as he pushed, gradually forcing the cart to turn until it slowed to a stop, mere feet from the frightened children. A moment of shocked silence fell over the fairgrounds, followed by thunderous applause. Ellie rushed to Ember's side, checking him for injuries while hugging his neck. "You brave, wonderful boy," she exclaimed, her voice thick with emotion. "Lucky break. Liam muttered, though his eyes lingered on Ember longer than usual. Throughout the afternoon, people kept approaching their booth, asking about the hero foal. Several commented on his quick thinking and bravery. A well-known local trainer, Marcus Henderson, studied Ember with particular interest. "That's not just luck," Marcus said to Liam. "That kind of intelligence and quick response, you can't train that. It's natural ability." He gestured toward Ember, who was now calmly accepting pats from admiring children. With the right training, he could be something special in competitions. Not just jumping, but maybe cross-country or even search and rescue work. It's not always about size. Liam's expression shifted slightly, his usual dismissive attitude giving way to thoughtful consideration. He watched as more people gathered around Ember, the foal's gentle demeanor and bright eyes charming everyone who approached. Back at the stable that evening, Ellie presented Ember with his favorite treat, a crisp apple she'd saved especially for him. "You're a real hero," she told him softly, stroking his neck as he munched contentedly. From the stable doorway, Liam observed the pair silently, his arms crossed but his expression softer than usual. For the first time, he seemed to be truly seeing Ember, not just looking at him. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows as Ellie sat across from Liam at the breakfast table, stirring her untouched oatmeal. The wooden spoon made soft circles in the cooling breakfast as her stomach churned with worry. Liam cleared his throat, setting down his coffee mug with purpose, the sound echoing in the quiet kitchen. "I've made a decision," he announced, his weathered hands folded on the table. "With Misty's competition schedule coming up, I need to focus entirely on her training. I think it's best if we find a buyer for Ember, someone who has the time to develop him properly." Ellie's spoon clattered against her bowl, the sound sharp and jarring. "No, you can't sell him," she protested, her voice cracking with emotion. "After yesterday, how can you not see his potential? He showed everyone what he's capable of." "One lucky incident doesn't make him a champion," Liam replied firmly, his jaw set in that familiar stubborn way she'd come to know. Pushing her chair back with determination, Ellie pulled out a carefully written schedule from her jacket pocket, smoothing the creased paper with trembling fingers. "Look, I've worked it all out. I can train Ember early mornings and evenings, completely separate from Misty's training times. It won't interfere at all." Liam shook his head, his expression stern. "He's too small, Ellie. He'll never have the strength to compete at high levels. Sometimes we have to face reality." "That's not true!" Ellie rushed to the phone mounted on the kitchen wall, her hands shaking as she dialed. Within an hour, both Dr. Thompson, their vet, and Marcus Henderson, the trainer from the fair, arrived at the farm, their trucks kicking up dust in the driveway. "Ember's size isn't a deal breaker," Dr. Thompson explained, spreading growth charts across the kitchen table and pointing to specific markers. "Many successful competition horses started small. Look at these statistics." Marcus nodded in agreement, his experienced eyes bright with conviction. "What that foal lacks in size, he makes up for in brains and adaptability. Those qualities are harder to find than raw strength. I've seen it time and time again." Liam rubbed his chin thoughtfully, considering their words as he paced the kitchen floor. Finally, he turned to Ellie, his expression softening slightly. 3 months, he said firmly. "You have 3 months to show me measurable progress. If he doesn't meet my standards by then, we find him a new home. Deal?" Ellie stepped forward, her heart pounding, but her stance steady as she extended her hand. "Deal," she said firmly, meeting his gaze with determination that matched his own. After shaking on it, she hurried across the yard to the stable, where Ember waited in his stall, his gentle eyes brightening at her approach. "We've got work to do, boy," she whispered, wrapping her arms around his warm neck. Ember responded by gently nuzzling her shoulder, his warm breath tickling her skin, as if understanding the importance of the moment they shared. The first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon as Ellie sat at her small desk, a fresh notebook open before her. Her pen moved quickly across the paper as she outlined each step of Ember's training plan. She divided the page into sections: strength building, agility work, and confidence exercises. Her alarm had gone off at 4:30 a.m., but excitement had pushed away any trace of tiredness. In the crisp morning air, Ellie led Ember to the training paddock. She started with simple exercises, setting up a series of poles on the ground for him to step over. Ember's legs trembled slightly as he picked his way through the course, but his eyes remained focused and alert. "Good boy," Ellie encouraged, offering gentle pats when he completed each round. As the morning progressed, she increased the challenge, raising some poles slightly off the ground. Liam appeared at the fence, coffee mug in hand, watching with critical eyes. "His left rear leg is dragging," he called out. "Work on his rhythm first before adding height." Ellie nodded, adjusting her approach. She appreciated Liam's technical knowledge, even if his delivery was gruff. She combined his advice with extra encouragement, speaking softly to Ember as they worked through the exercises again. By mid-morning, sweat dampened Ember's coat as he tackled each challenge. The small hurdle that had been his nemesis loomed ahead. Ellie's heart beat faster as she guided him toward it, keeping her voice steady and confident. Ember gathered himself, his muscles bunching, and sailed over the hurdle with unexpected grace. Ellie clapped her hands in delight, immediately reaching for the apple pieces in her pocket. "Don't get excited," Liam said from his spot by the fence. "One jump doesn't make a champion. Probably just got lucky." But Ellie barely heard him. She was too busy praising Ember, feeding him apple slices while scratching his favorite spot behind his ears. The trust between them had grown stronger with each passing day, evident in the way Ember leaned into her touch and followed her commands with increasing eagerness. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the paddock, Ellie led a tired but content Ember back to his stall. His steps were lighter now, more confident than they had been that morning. She removed his lead rope and ran her hands along his neck, leaning close to his ear. "We'll show him what you're made of," she whispered softly. Ember responded with a gentle nicker, pressing his muzzle against her shoulder. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training paddock as Ellie made final adjustments to her most ambitious obstacle course yet. She'd spent hours setting it up, weaving cones, raised poles, and a narrow jump that would test Ember's growing skills. Her hands trembled slightly with excitement as she checked each element one last time. Liam stood at the fence, arms crossed tightly over his chest, watching with his usual stern expression, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. "Ready, boy?" Ellie patted Ember's neck, leading him to the starting position. The small horse's ears perked forward, studying the challenge ahead. His coat gleamed in the early light, testament to the careful grooming she'd given him that morning. Ember started strong, picking his way through the cones with careful precision. His hooves lifted cleanly over the poles, showing how far he'd come in just a few weeks. Each step showed growing confidence, his movements becoming more fluid and assured. Ellie's heart swelled with pride as she guided him forward, her quiet words of encouragement carrying on the morning breeze. But when they approached the narrow jump, Ember's confidence faltered. He pulled back, snorting nervously at the unfamiliar obstacle, his muscles tensing beneath her touch. Ellie kept her voice steady, encouraging him forward, but Ember's hesitation grew with each passing moment. When she tried to coax him closer, he stumbled sideways, nearly losing his footing on the dewy grass. "This is exactly what I meant," Liam called out, shaking his head. his voice carrying a sharp edge of frustration. "You're babying him too much. He needs to learn to face challenges head-on, not be coddled through every little obstacle. That's not how champions are made." Ellie's cheeks burned, but she kept her focus on settling Ember, running her hand along his neck in soothing strokes. After leading him back to his stall, she spent hours at her desk that evening, poring over training manuals and online resources, determined to find a better approach. Her notebook filled with ideas about building confidence gradually rather than pushing too far too fast. The pages covered in her neat handwriting and detailed diagrams. Later that night, she returned to the paddock with Ember. This time, she'd created a modified version of the jump, lower and wider, making it less intimidating. The moon cast enough light to work by, creating a peaceful atmosphere away from judging eyes. She led Ember through basic exercises first, praising his efforts but not overdoing the rewards, finding that sweet spot between encouragement and challenge. "Let's try this together," she murmured, guiding him toward the smaller jump. Her heart beat in rhythm with his hoofbeats. The first attempt ended in another refusal, but Ellie remained patient, speaking softly to him between tries. On the third try, Ember gathered his courage and cleared it cleanly, landing with surprising grace. Ellie let out a delighted cheer, her excitement echoing across the quiet yard, startling a few nearby birds into flight. In the stable afterward, as she ran the brush along Ember's coat, taking extra care with his favorite spots, Liam appeared in the doorway. He watched them for a moment, his expression softer than usual in the dim light, then gave a single, approving nod before walking away. It wasn't much, but Ellie felt her determination strengthen. That small gesture told her she was finally on the right track, and maybe, just maybe, Liam was beginning to see what she'd known all along about Ember's potential. The rumble of truck engines announced the arrival of Liam's old racing colleagues. 3 weathered trainers stepped out, their boots crunching on the gravel as they headed toward the stables. Their well-worn jeans and faded baseball caps spoke of years spent in the sun working with horses. Ellie watched from where she was working with Ember in the paddock, noting their confident strides and critical gazes that seemed to evaluate everything they passed. "Misty's looking good, Liam," one of them called out, tipping his hat. His weathered face crinkled with approval as he assessed the mare. But then his eyes fell on Ember, and his expression shifted to something less friendly, his mouth turning down at the corners. "What's that little thing doing here?" Another trainer laughed, a harsh sound that made Ellie's shoulders tense and Ember's ears twitch backward. "Looks more like a pony than a racehorse. Bit small for your standards, isn't he, Liam?" He crossed his arms, shaking his head with obvious disapproval. The words stung Ellie like a physical blow. She stepped forward, her chin lifted, and her hands trembling slightly at her sides. "Ember may be small, but he's got more heart than horses twice his size. Just last week at the fair, he stopped a runaway cart from hitting some children. He's smart, brave, and learns faster than any horse I've worked with." Her voice grew stronger with each word, fueled by her belief in Ember. The third trainer, a quieter man named Tom, studied Ember with interest, his eyes lingering on the horse's muscled legs and alert expression. "Show us what he can do, then," he suggested, gesturing to the training area, his tone more curious than dismissive. Liam shifted uncomfortably, but nodded his approval, his hands tucked into his pockets. Ellie's heart raced as she led Ember to the starting position. She'd been practicing with him daily, but performing under scrutiny was different, and she could feel the weight of their judgment. Taking a deep breath, she guided Ember through a series of exercises. He wove through the cones with precision, his small size allowing for tight turns that impressed even the skeptical trainers. Their eyebrows raised as they watched his fluid movements. When they reached the jumps, Ember hesitated for just a moment before clearing them cleanly, his determination evident in every movement, his hooves barely touching the ground. "Well, I'll be," Tom said, stepping closer to the fence and leaning forward with genuine interest. "He's got good form for his size." He turned to Liam, reaching for his wallet. "I'd be interested in taking him off your hands. Name your price." Before Liam could respond, Ellie's heart nearly stopped, and her fingers tightened in Ember's mane. But to her surprise, Liam shook his head, standing a little straighter. "He's not for sale," he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. The words hung in the air like a shield. Later that evening, as Ellie finished her chores in the growing darkness, Liam approached her in the stable. The soft glow of the barn lights cast shadows across his face. "Ember did well today," he admitted, though his expression remained serious, his eyes fixed on the distance. "But don't let it go to your head. There's still a lot of work ahead." Ellie couldn't help but smile at his words, recognizing them for the praise they were. The warmth of his approval meant more than any offer to buy Ember ever could. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training yard as Ellie marked out the final measurements for Ember's obstacle course. 6 weeks had passed since Liam's challenge began, and she wanted solid proof of their progress. She'd carefully planned each element, weaving poles, small jumps, and tight turns that would showcase Ember's agility. Liam stood by the fence, stopwatch in hand, his face unreadable. "Remember, it's not just about finishing," he called out. "Time matters in competition." Ellie nodded, leading Ember through a final walkthrough. Her hands trembled slightly as she guided him past each obstacle. "This is it, buddy," she whispered, patting his neck. "Show him what you can do." When they lined up at the start, Ember's ears pricked forward, alert and ready. At Liam's signal, they began. Ember wove through the first set of poles smoothly, his small size allowing him to make tight turns that impressed even Liam, whose eyebrows rose slightly. The first 3 jumps went perfectly, with Ember gathering himself and clearing each one with room to spare. Ellie's confidence grew with each successful obstacle. Then came the sound, a metal feed bucket clattering against the fence, knocked over by a gust of wind. Ember startled, losing his rhythm and veering off course. His eyes went wide, and he danced sideways, nearly unseating Ellie. "Easy, boy," Ellie soothed, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. She stroked his neck, feeling the tension in his muscles. "We've got this, just like in practice." After a few moments, Ember's breathing steadied. With gentle encouragement, he returned to the course, tackling the remaining obstacles with determination. His final sprint to the finish line showed no trace of his earlier fear. Liam clicked the stopwatch and frowned at the numbers. 3 minutes 15 seconds, he announced. "That's slower than what you've been averaging in practice." Ellie's heart sank, but then she noticed something in Liam's expression had softened. "But," he continued, tucking the stopwatch into his pocket, "most horses would have given up after that spook. He came back and finished strong. That's worth noting." Walking Ember back to the stable, Ellie reflected on the morning's events. Speed and perfect form weren't everything. Ember's willingness to trust her and try again spoke volumes about his character. Liam followed them into the stable, watching as Ellie began removing Ember's tack. "He's still got a long way to go," he said, leaning against the stall door. Then, after a pause, he added, "But I'll admit, I didn't expect him to come this far." Ellie smiled, recognizing the subtle praise in his words. "We'll keep working," she promised, giving Ember an affectionate pat. "Every single day." The morning light had barely touched the horizon when Ellie made her way to the stables. As she rounded the corner, she spotted Ember already standing alert at the paddock gate. His ears perked forward in anticipation. His eager whicker made her laugh. "Someone's ready for training," she said. pulling a carrot from her pocket. Ember's soft lips tickled her palm as he accepted the treat, and she couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come from those first wobbly days. In the training arena, Ellie set up a more challenging course than usual. The jump stood slightly higher, and the turns between obstacles were tighter. She watched as Ember surveyed the setup, his intelligent eyes taking in each new challenge. They started with warm-up exercises, but Ember seemed to sense something different about today's session. He attacked each task with newfound determination, his small frame moving with surprising grace through the complex patterns Ellie had designed. During a particularly tricky sequence of sharp turns, Ellie noticed movement by the fence. Liam stood watching, his arms crossed, but his expression unusually thoughtful. After Ember successfully completed a tight figure eight, Ellie guided him to a stop. "What do you think?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual despite her nervousness. Liam stepped closer, studying Ember's form. "His turns are getting sharper," he said. "But try shifting your weight earlier in the approach. It'll help him balance better through the curves." Ellie blinked, surprised by the helpful tone of his advice. She implemented his suggestion on the next run, and Ember responded beautifully, moving through the turns with even more precision. That evening, over a simple dinner of shepherd's pie, Liam pushed his food around his plate before speaking. "Had a horse once," he began, "named Thundercloud. Everyone said he was too stubborn for racing, but I saw something in him." He paused, lost in the memory. "Took months of work, but he proved them all wrong. Won 3 major races that season." "What happened to him?" Ellie asked softly. "Retired him to stud. Still sends me Christmas cards," Liam said with a rare smile. "Haven't felt that kind of potential in a horse since then." He glanced at Ellie. "Until recently, that is." The admission hung in the air between them, a bridge forming over their previous divide. Though Liam quickly returned to discussing technical training aspects, Ellie could sense the shift in their dynamic. As night fell, Ellie made her final rounds. She stopped at Ember's stall, finding him already asleep. His sides rose and fell in peaceful rhythm, and moonlight filtered through the window, highlighted his unique markings. Standing there, watching him rest, Ellie felt overwhelmed by how far they'd come together. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training arena as Ellie guided Ember through their most challenging course yet. The obstacles loomed larger than before, testing the limits of what they'd practiced. Ember's determination showed in every stride as he cleared the first few jumps with growing confidence. "That's it, boy," Ellie called out encouragingly as they approached a particularly tricky combination of jumps. Everything happened in an instant. Ember, perhaps too eager to please, misjudged the distance to the jump. His front legs caught the top rail, sending him stumbling forward. He landed awkwardly, his right front leg buckling beneath him. "Ember!" Ellie's heart stopped as she rushed to his side. The small horse struggled to his feet but favored his injured leg, holding it slightly off the ground. With trembling hands, Ellie pulled out her phone and called the vet. Liam, hearing the commotion, hurried over from the barn. "What happened?" he asked, his voice sharp with concern. "He caught the rail," Ellie explained, fighting back tears. "It's my fault. I shouldn't have made it so high." The vet arrived within the hour, examining Ember's leg carefully. "Good news," she said finally. "Nothing's broken, but he's got a nasty sprain. He'll need at least a week of rest, maybe more." Liam crossed his arms, his expression stern but not unkind. "You've been pushing too hard, Ellie. Sometimes slower is better." Ellie nodded, watching as the vet wrapped Ember's leg. "I know. I just wanted to prove he could do it." "He's already proving himself," Liam replied. "But he won't prove anything if he's injured." Over the next few days, Ellie devoted herself to keeping Ember's mind active while his body healed. She brought puzzle toys to his stall, hiding treats in different compartments that he had to figure out how to open. Despite his injury, Ember attacked each challenge with enthusiasm, nickering with delight when he succeeded. Liam often stopped by to check on Ember's progress. One evening, he watched as the foal cleverly solved a new puzzle, using his nose to slide open a complicated latch. "Never seen a horse pick things up so quick," he admitted. "Most would have given up by now, especially being cooped up like this." "He's special," Ellie said softly, stroking Ember's neck. Later that evening, as Ellie prepared to change Ember's bandage, Liam appeared in the stable doorway. Without a word, he grabbed a fresh wrap and knelt beside her. Together, they carefully unwound the old bandage and applied the new one, their movements gentle and synchronized. The silence between them was comfortable now, filled with shared purpose rather than tension. Ember stood quietly, seeming to understand the significance of the moment as both his caretakers tended to him together. The morning dew still clung to the grass as Ellie led Ember from his stall into the paddock. After a week of rest, the vet had finally cleared him for light training. His bandage was off, and his stride looked steady and strong. "Easy now," Ellie murmured as Ember tugged eagerly at the lead rope. His eyes were bright and his ears pricked forward, clearly ready to get back to work. She started with basic walking exercises, leading him in gentle circles and figure eights. Ember followed her cues perfectly, though she could feel his eagerness to do more. After 20 minutes of walking, she introduced some light trotting. "Looking good," Liam called from where he leaned against the fence. "Keep it simple today." Encouraged by Ember's progress, Ellie spent the next few days gradually increasing his workload. She set up small ground poles and low cavaletti, helping him rebuild his confidence. Though he hesitated at first, especially near the spot where he'd fallen, Ember's natural determination soon took over. By the end of the week, Ellie had an idea. "What if we invited some neighbors to watch him work?" she suggested to Liam over breakfast. "Nothing fancy, just a small demonstration?" Liam frowned into his coffee cup. "I don't know." "It would be good practice for him," Ellie pressed. "Low pressure, friendly faces." "Fine," Liam agreed reluctantly. "But keep it simple." The next afternoon, a small group gathered around the training arena. Ellie had set up a basic course with a few low jumps and poles. Ember seemed to sense the importance of the moment, holding his head high as she led him out. They started with simple exercises, showing off Ember's careful footwork and willing attitude. The neighbors clapped appreciatively, especially Mrs. Thompson from the farm down the road, who called out encouraging words. When they approached the first jump, Ember's stride faltered slightly. He stumbled on the landing, but quickly caught himself, pushing forward with determination. The small crowd burst into applause, impressed by his recovery. "That's the way, Ember," Mrs. Thompson cheered. "What a clever boy." Ellie glanced at Liam and caught an unmistakable glimmer of pride in his eyes as he watched Ember complete the course. His usual stern expression had softened, and he nodded approvingly at each successful element. As the neighbors prepared to leave, Mr. Jenkins from the neighboring farm paused beside Ember's paddock. "You've got something special here," he said, patting Ember's neck. "He's the little horse with a big heart, that's for sure." Liam stood nearby, and though he didn't speak, his slight smile said everything about how far Ember had come. The phone rang just as Liam was finishing his morning coffee. He listened intently, his expression shifting from surprise to concern. "A beginner's competition," he repeated, glancing through the kitchen window at Ember in the paddock. "I'll have to think about it." After hanging up, he found Ellie brushing Ember's coat. Got a call from Tom Bradley, he said, leaning against the stable door. He's organizing a small competition next month. Wants to know if we'd enter Ember. Ellie's eyes lit up. Really? That would be perfect. It's exactly what we need to prove what he can do. Hold on now, Liam cautioned. Competition's different from training. There'll be crowds, strange horses, pressure. We can prepare him for all that, Ellie insisted. Please, Liam. We've come so far already. Liam studied Ember for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, but we'll need to step up his training. Over the next few weeks, the farm fell into a new routine. Liam shared his competition experience, teaching Ellie about presentation and protocol. She soaked up every detail while adding her own gentle touches to keep Ember calm and focused. Remember, Liam explained during one session, it's not just about the jumps. He needs to be comfortable with distractions. He began rattling a bucket of feed while Ellie guided Ember through his paces. Ellie worked tirelessly, often staying late into the evening. She created mock competition scenarios, playing recorded crowd noise on her phone while working with Ember. Some nights, Liam would find her in the barn office, surrounded by training manuals and competition rulebooks. You're overthinking it, he told her one evening, setting down a mug of hot chocolate beside her notes. Ember's got heart. That counts for more than perfect technique. The night before the competition, Ellie could barely sleep. She tossed and turned, running through their routine in her mind. At 4 a.m, she gave up and headed to the stable. Ember greeted her with a soft nicker as she began their competition day preparations. She brushed his coat until it gleamed, carefully braiding his mane while whispering words of encouragement. Liam arrived as she was double-checking their equipment. Nervous? He asked, helping her load the trailer. A little, Ellie admitted, securing Ember's lead rope. What if we're not ready? You're ready, Liam assured her, his gruff voice unusually gentle. Both of you. The drive to the competition ground seemed to take forever. As they pulled into the parking area, Ellie's stomach fluttered at the sight of the arena, already busy with horses and riders warming up. She stood at Ember's side as they unloaded from the trailer, taking in the unfamiliar sights and sounds. The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds, and the air buzzed with nervous energy. Let's show them what we're made of, she whispered to Ember, who responded with a soft nicker, his ears pricked forward with interest. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the competition grounds as Ellie carefully guided Ember down the trailer ramp. The air hummed with excitement. Horses whinnied in the distance. Spectators chatted eagerly, and announcements crackled over the loudspeaker. Ember's ears twitched at each new sound, but he stayed close to Ellie's side. In the warm-up area, Ellie's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted Ember's tack. Other horses towered over him as they trotted past, their riders calling out friendly greetings. Liam stood nearby, arms crossed but eyes watchful. Remember to keep him focused, Liam advised, his usual gruff tone softened. You've done the work. Trust in that. Ellie nodded and led Ember through their warm-up routine. As they approached a practice jump, Ember hesitated, then stumbled on the landing. Ellie's stomach dropped. I don't know if we're ready, she whispered, patting Ember's neck with shaking hands. Liam stepped closer. That horse has more fight in him than any I've seen. He'll bounce back. He always does. When their number was called, Ellie took a deep breath and guided Ember into the arena. The crowd's murmurs seemed to fade as they approached the first jump. Ember's ears perked forward, his stride uncertain at first. The initial jump was rough. Ember barely cleared it. But as they moved through the course, something clicked. His steps became more confident, his turns sharper. The crowd began to cheer as the small horse tackled each obstacle with growing determination. Halfway through, they faced a particularly challenging combination jump. Ember stumbled slightly on the approach, drawing gasps from the spectators. But in a display of pure grit, he recovered mid-stride and cleared both elements cleanly. As they soared over the final jump, the crowd erupted in applause. Ellie threw her arms around Ember's neck, tears streaming down her face. They hadn't won first place, but when the announcer called them forward for a special recognition award celebrating extraordinary spirit and determination, Ellie couldn't stop smiling. She caught Liam's eye as she accepted the ribbon. For once, he wasn't hiding his pride behind his usual stern expression. The late afternoon sun streamed through the stable windows as Ellie carefully hung Ember's special recognition award on the wall. Her hands smoothed the bright ribbon, making sure it hung perfectly straight. Behind her, Liam leaned against the stable door, his usual stern expression replaced by something softer. "It looks good there," he said quietly, nodding at the award. Word spread quickly through their small farming community about Ember's inspiring performance. Over the next few days, a steady stream of visitors arrived at the farm, eager to meet the determined little horse everyone was talking about. Children pressed their faces against the paddock fence, pointing and giggling as Ember showed off his tricks. "He's not much bigger than a pony," one little girl said, "but Daddy says he's got the biggest heart of any horse he's ever seen." Ellie beamed with pride as she demonstrated some of Ember's training exercises for the visitors. Even Liam found himself sharing stories about Ember's progress, his earlier skepticism forgotten. On Wednesday morning, Liam received an unexpected phone call. Sarah Mitchell, a renowned trainer who had attended the competition, expressed keen interest in working with Ember and Ellie. "Your apprentice and that little horse have something special," Sarah said over the phone. "With proper guidance, they could compete at much higher levels. I'd like to help them get there." Liam's grip tightened on the receiver. He glanced out the window at Ellie and Ember working in the paddock, their easy partnership evident in every movement. The thought of changing their routine, of sharing their training with someone else, made him unexpectedly uneasy. That evening, over dinner, Liam shared the news with Ellie. Her eyes lit up instantly. "Sarah Mitchell? The Sarah Mitchell?" Ellie could barely contain her excitement. "She's worked with some of the best competitors in the country." "It would mean changes," Liam cautioned. "Long drives to her facility, different training methods. But think of what Ember could become." Ellie leaned forward earnestly. "You've seen how much he's grown already. Imagine what he could do with professional guidance." They discussed it for hours, weighing the pros and cons. Gradually, Liam's resistance softened in the face of Ellie's enthusiasm and logical arguments. Under Sarah's guidance, their training schedule intensified. Ember faced more complex obstacles and learned to maintain his speed through challenging combinations. Though the work was harder, he attacked each new challenge with his characteristic determination. As the sun began to set one evening, Ellie stood at the paddock fence, watching Ember practice his newest routine. The golden light caught his coat, making him shine like burnished copper. Liam walked up beside her and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "He's going to be something special," Liam admitted quietly. Ellie smiled, her heart full of pride for how far they'd come. The autumn morning dawned crisp and clear as Ellie and Liam arrived at the prestigious Valley Ridge Equestrian Center. The venue was impressive, with manicured grounds and state-of-the-art facilities that made their small farm seem humble in comparison. Ember stood quietly in his trailer, his ears pricked forward with interest at the new surroundings. "Ready for this, boy?" Ellie whispered, stroking his neck as they unloaded. Ember nudged her shoulder gently, a gesture that had become their silent way of communicating confidence. During the course walkthrough, Ellie's steps slowed as she took in the challenging layout. The jumps towered higher than anything they'd practiced, and the turns between obstacles left little room for error. Her stomach tightened with worry. "These jumps," she began, her voice trailing off. Liam placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Remember when he first cleared that fallen tree in the back pasture? Nobody thought he could do it then either, but Ember's never let obstacles define his limits." The morning of the competition arrived with a buzz of excitement. The stands filled with spectators, and the warm-up ring bustled with activity. Among the other competitors, Ember looked small, but his coat gleamed like polished copper in the sunlight. As their turn approached, Ellie guided Ember to the starting position. The bell rang, and they were off. Ember moved with fluid grace, his small size allowing him to navigate the tight turns with surprising agility. Jump after jump, they maintained their rhythm, drawing gasps of admiration from the crowd. Halfway through the course, a child's balloon popped in the stands with a sharp crack. Ember startled, losing his stride and nearly missing his approach to the next jump. Ellie's heart raced, but she leaned forward, speaking softly to him. "Easy, boy. I'm right here with you." Ember's ears flicked back at her voice, and he found his focus again. They recovered smoothly, attacking the remaining obstacles with renewed determination. As they cleared the final jump, the crowd erupted in cheers. Their time wasn't enough for first place, but when Ellie dismounted, she threw her arms around Ember's neck, tears streaming down her face. The judges approached with a special trophy, the Spirit of the Competition Award, recognizing their exceptional partnership and determination. From the sidelines, Liam clapped proudly, his usual reserved expression replaced by a broad smile. The morning after the competition, life at the farm settled back into its familiar rhythm. Ellie arrived early as always, carrying Ember's trophy to display in the stable's office. The morning dew sparkled on the grass as she led him out for their daily training session. "Back to basics today," she told him, setting up their usual warm-up routine. Ember followed her commands with the same enthusiasm he'd shown since day one, his hooves marking precise patterns in the dirt. Later that afternoon, Liam called Ellie to the storage barn. When she arrived, she found him standing next to several new pieces of training equipment, jump standards painted in bright colors, training poles, and even a set of specialized cavaletti for building strength and coordination. "These are for you and Ember," Liam said, his gruff voice softening. "I was wrong about him, Ellie, and about you." He ran his hand along one of the poles. "You both proved me wrong in the best possible way." Tears welled up in Ellie's eyes as she took in the gift. "Thank you," she whispered, touching one of the jump standards reverently. "You've shown me that sometimes the greatest potential comes in unexpected packages," Liam continued. "I spent years chasing what I thought a champion should look like. But Ember," he shook his head, smiling, "he's taught me more about heart and determination than any other horse I've worked with." In the nearby paddock, Misty grazed peacefully, occasionally lifting her head to watch Ember. Her maternal pride was evident in the way she nickered softly whenever he passed nearby. Word of Ember's achievement at the competition spread through the local equestrian community. Soon, people began showing up at the farm, hoping to catch a glimpse of the small horse with the big heart. Young riders arrived with their parents, inspired by Ember's story. One afternoon, as Liam watched another group of visitors leave, he turned to Ellie. "I've been thinking," he said. "Maybe we could do something more here. Help other riders find their own path, like you did with Ember." "You mean open the farm for training?" Ellie's eyes lit up at the possibility. Liam nodded. "There's plenty of young riders out there who need someone to believe in them, just like Ember needed you." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the paddock, Ellie and Ember worked through their exercises. The new equipment gleamed in the golden light, and Ember attacked each challenge with his characteristic determination. Liam leaned against the fence, watching them work. His face wore an expression of contentment that had been rare just months ago. Ember paused in his routine to approach Ellie, giving her a gentle nudge with his nose. Then he turned his gaze to the horizon, ears pricked forward, ready for whatever came next. If you enjoyed the story of Ember, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.